Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another webinar from the TUC. I'm Anna, and I'm joined by Phil Lindsey, who I'll get to introduce himself in just a minute. So welcome to any new viewers, and welcome back to any repeat viewers. It's great to have all of you with us. I'll just quickly run over our usual housekeeping. So we do have live captions on this webinar. You can see there's a green button at the bottom of the screen. Do please click that to open the captions if you want to follow along with those. We are, of course, recording today's webinar as we always do. So if you miss anything or you want to rewatch it, don't worry, we'll be sending you the link later today or tomorrow morning, along with any resources that Phil mentions about this piece of work. I can see there are already lots of you introducing yourselves and saying where you're from in the chat. We always love to see that because we love to hear what's going on in workplaces. So please do continue to do that. And if you've got any questions for Phil, you can post them to him in the panel that looks like a speech bubble with a question mark on the right-hand side. We'll try and get to as many of those questions as we can after the main bit of the webinar. And we do today have a poll as well. So on the right hand side of the screen, you can see what looks like a bar chart. If you click on that, we've got a little poll running where we're asking you to vote. And I can see that several of you already have. At the moment, you, the audience, won't be able to see the result of that poll, but we will reveal the poll results before we close. So do please vote. And I can see the votes going up already, which is fantastic. So we're joined by Phil Lindsey from the 4-Day Week campaign. So first of all, Phil, can you just introduce yourself, please, and tell us who are the 4-Day Week campaign?
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you very much for having me onto this discussion. So I'm Phil Lindsey. I'm an organizer for the 4-Day Week campaign. And hopefully this shouldn't come as a shock to anyone, but the 4-Day Week campaign is the UK's campaign for a 4-day week. And that's looking to sort of reestablish sort of the standard working week, which is at the moment around 5 days, 40 hours, as 4 days and around 32 hours, but with a lot of flexibility within that. I think it's important to say that we are independent and non-partisan, so we're not affiliated to any particular political party. We kind of believe that there is a case to be made for the 4-day week to whoever you are, regardless of your political persuasion. And where people might have heard about us before is that we actually ran the world's largest 4-day week trials right here in the UK, alongside another organisation called 4-Day Week Global. We did that back in 2022, and yeah, biggest trials ever conducted, and they were very successful. And we've sort of been building from there. So
that's amazing, Phil. But let's imagine I've never heard of you before. Can you explain what the 4-day week is? I'm a complete newbie to this, so explain it from the beginning, please.
Absolutely. It's a very good question. I mean, it seems obvious on the face of things, but really there's some complexity to what a 4-day week is. And it's worth digging into because particularly if you're going to explain to your boss about why you think you should be working a 4-day week, it's really helpful to be able to say exactly what you mean by that. So when we say the 4-day week, often we're talking about the 100-80-100 model. That's the idea that you're able to do 100% of your work in 80% of the time for 100% of the pay. And I'll say this a lot, that's sort of a rough guideline, but that's just an easy way to explain it. And the idea is basically because you are better rested, when you are actually at your place of work, you're able to be more productive per hour. So you're able to get more done when you're actually there. That's one way in which you're able to do 100% of the work in 80% of the time. But it gets a little bit more complex than that, in the sense that the productivity is found in other areas as well. We find from a lot of the companies that we've worked with that by switching to a 4-day week, they massively reduce their sickness absences, so they're able to be more productive there, and they also boost their recruitment and retention. So they're not spending a lot of extra money finding new people to fill roles because people are staying around because they've got a pretty good working week. So that's roughly what we mean there. We would say that 32 hours is the standard, but there are going to be variations within that. We tend to see 4-day weeks settle between 28 hours, 27, 28, and 36 hours. You wouldn't expect a 4-day week to go above and beyond 36 hours, because then you're into compressed hours territory, which is where some workplaces try and just take the 5-day week's worth of hours and just squeeze them into 4 days. And actually, you end up losing out on a lot of the benefits from a proper 4-day week, that come from rest and relaxation and recuperation. So that's sort of what we're talking about with a 4-day week. The key is that we're looking for a meaningful reduction in hours. Take the work week that you have now, meaningfully reduce it whilst trying to have the same output. That's sort of the goal there.
Thanks for that excellent and easy to understand definition. I really liked the bit you said at the beginning where you said 100% of work in 80% of time for 100% of the pay. So I think that's really a really helpful way to understand it. So now we know what a 4-day week is. We know that our audience here are workplace union reps. So other than the obvious, why do we think the 4-day week is a union issue, or some of the arguments that can become a union issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say first and foremost, it's a union issue because, well, it is already an issue for a number of union groups. We actually work with a lot of workplace union groups on campaigns for a 4-day week in their workplace. We're working with union members from Unite, from the NUJ, from PCS, from G&B Scotland, all on separate campaigns for a 4-day week in their workplaces. And some of those have already been successful. So it's very much already part of what some union groups are doing. There's been a number of motions at different unions to sort of make the 4-day week campaign part of their national strategy. But the reason it has to be a union issue is because there's a couple of reasons, really. Up until about the 80s, what we saw was that over time, the average working week was declining at a nice steady rate. You'd get reduction in working hours, falling steadily from, I think, like 1949, people were working a 45-hour week, and it sort of steadily went down from there. And then we hit the 80s, and it sort of stalled. So we've sort of roughly stalled since the 80s. And it's been quite a long time since the 80s. So it's quite a long time for our working hours to stall. So it's going to take organised workers coming together to sort of kickstart that reduction in working hours. Because the fact of it is that while we've worked with a lot of fantastic business owners or managing directors who are on the front foot and want to bring in a 4-day week because they see the benefits for employees and employer, the majority will need a bit more persuasion. There's a massive status quo bias for the 5-day week. It's been around for 100 years, so people are kind of comfy with it, and it's going to take, again, organised workers coming together to say, we need to change this, and actually we should be changing this because it's something that's going to be not only beneficial for us as workers, but it's going to be beneficial for you as an employer and for the country as a whole.
Thanks, Phil. And that leads us nicely into my next question, which we've already touched on some of these, the benefits for 4-day week. But headlines, benefits of the 4-day week for workers and then for the employer, like the kind of headline figures and facts that we can use to persuade not just our employers but our colleagues as well, who might be a bit skeptical.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll start with employees because that's possibly a bit more obvious that the case for a 4-day week there. So with employees, what you find is that stress and burnout obviously are reduced working a 4-day week. And we saw that borne out in the data from the 4-day week trials that we ran in the UK in 2022. We also see actually the costs for employees go down. If you're working a 4-day week, your commuting costs go down by 1 day a week. Childcare costs can also go down, because you've not got that extra day where you have to pay an extortionate amount of money to put your child into nursery care. It's sort of a big problem here in the UK at the moment. And also, your time for living goes up. Your time for spending time with your friends and your family, pursuing your hobbies, your goals, your dreams. You have that time to go and do that on a 4-day week. So that's for the employees. If we look at employers, a big win for employers is that recruitment and retention go up. It's much easier to recruit if you're able to offer a working week that has some proper work-life balance. And it's also much easier to retain your staff as well. And again, this is stuff that we were able to see from the UK trials. And also actually from South Cambridgeshire District Council's 4-day week. I don't know if you're aware that we have one council in the UK currently, one district council in the UK currently working a 4-day week, and they chose to do so because being in the public sector, they were struggling to recruit and retain in some roles because they couldn't compete with the private sector. The money on offer in the private sector was far more, so they switched to a 4-day week, and they found that they were able to hold on to a lot more of their employees and fill some really difficult to fill roles, particularly in planning. And actually, by doing so, they saved the council, I think it was £434,000 on agency spend last year. So that's an employer seeing a major benefit from the 4-day week. I would also say, and this is great to be able to talk to possibly a lot of union reps out there, the 4-day week can be a brilliant solution to a pay claim deadlock. If you've made your pay claim and your employer is adamant that they cannot match the number that you have put forward, you can say, well, let's try pulling another lever. How about trialing a 4-day week and meeting us halfway? Because as we've argued, the 4-day week should be a cost neutral, if not a positive sort of change for an organisation, and it's one that I think that a lot of workers want. So it's definitely a way to add that in.
Yeah, that is a great way to get people on board with it. So far, we've heard a lot about the advantages and the benefits, but what have we got in the way of evidence? Have we got some examples or, actual evidence to back up the interesting stuff we've been saying so far?
Yeah, I mean, you need evidence 100%. It's all well and good talking about the theory, but we need to know that it actually works. Luckily, we do. So as an organisation, the 4-day week campaign runs an accreditation scheme. We currently have 165 accredited employers. That means they work at a 4-day week. Most work a 32-hour 4-day week. Some work slightly more than that, but they all work a true 4-day week. And that covers, I think it's 28 different industries. So we know that it works in a number of organizations, and we know that it works in a number of different industries where there are different working patterns going on. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the UK trials that we ran back in 2022. So I'll just dig into those a little bit more. On the UK trials, we had I think it was 61 companies, around 3,000 workers all involved in that. It was a 6-month trial, so it's a nice long trial. The data that was collected was analysed by academics from Cambridge University, Boston University, and the Autonomy Institute. So it's really been dug into and properly looked at. And yeah, what they found was that stress and burnout went down, as you'd expect, working a shorter week, but also that for the organizations involved, profit was maintained. That was sort of the measure of productivity over the trial. And what they saw is that there was a 1.4% boost to profits on average. So on average, everyone did a little better during the 6 months they were working a 4-day week. They also saw that sick days and staff turnover were reduced as well. So I mean, there's some solid evidence there. And I think at the moment, 89% of companies that are involved in that trial are still operating a 4-day week 2 years on. So, it's got longevity to it as well. So yeah, that's some evidence there. And as I mentioned, South Cambridgeshire District Council, I'll just briefly talk about them again because it's quite an interesting story. They are the only district council currently running a 4-day week, and they've been under immense pressure actually from the government to stop running their 4-day week. There are certain people within the current government who believe that a 4-day week can't work, regardless of however much evidence you put in front of them. And so they've faced a lot of pressure from the government. They've been put under best value notice just for running a 4-day week. But the important point to make here is that even with all that pressure, they're still running their 4-day week. They're still they're in sort of a permanent trial at the moment. And the reason they've stuck with it is because it has been so successful. Because to undo it would put them back into a difficult position. They would lose the good stuff they've managed to retain. So, I mean, like, what more evidence would you need than an organisation under intense pressure to stop their 4-day week is sticking with it because it is just that successful. Oh, I think I've lost you there. Okay, well, hopefully we can start this again in a second. I think it's probably just a Wi-Fi issue. Hopefully not from my end, but you never know with these things.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me again? Okay, I don't know what happened there. Many apologies, and thank you for your patience in staying with us. It just threw me off. And yeah, I'm back. So that's great. Thank you, everyone, for staying online. I think I was just about to ask you before I got kicked off. Can people read about the evidence you've just been talking about and the case studies you mentioned? How can they do that if they're interested to find out more?
Brilliant. So absolutely, they can go to our website, 4dayweek.co.uk, where we've collected together a number of different things there. They can also pick up the 4-day week handbook, which our campaign director has put together, which what it does is it brings together basically all of the knowledge that we've built in the time that we've been an organisation working with businesses, transferring over to a 4-day week from a number of different industries. And it's sort of packed full of case studies, packed full of all the arguments that you will need if you take the 4-day week to your boss and they come back with their counter arguments. You will be prepared if you have this 4-day week handbook to hand, and I believe a link to it will be shared in the comments with the questions to us.
We will link that in the chat for you all. And we will make sure we send it out to you all with our follow-up email. Okay, so a bit of a practical question now. If a rep wants to organise in their workplace for a 4-day week, how do they start?
Okay, so actually just quickly on what the previous question, I just wanted to mention as well, it's well worth following us on social media. We're on pretty much every platform going. I think on Twitter, we are 4day_week. But if you search 4-day week campaign, you should be able to find us with a nice bright orange logo. It's a really good way of keeping up to date with what's going on with the 4-day week nationally and globally, because we're always posting new evidence as it comes up. And the reason I mention that is because if you want to build a campaign for a 4-day week where you work, you're going to need to start the conversation with your colleagues first. That's where it starts, really, is building that support among your colleagues. So it's good to know when there's new information coming out, specifically when it relates to the industry or the workplace that you work in. It's good to get to grips with all the evidence that is out there for a 4-day week. Good to really get a good understanding of what it is. And then, you need to be out there talking to your colleagues. And obviously, this can be tricky in this modern age with a lot of remote working and hybrid working. You're not necessarily bumping into your colleagues in the office kitchen. You have to find new ways to have these conversations. And that might be a case of using the workplace social medias that we have. It might be a Slack channel. It might be a survey on Microsoft Viva Engage. There are a number of different ways to sort of get this conversation going. But it's about using the tools available to you to have that conversation. What you need is that nice wide support amongst your colleagues. Union density is, of course, going to help. And I'm preaching to the choir here. If these are union members listening, they know the more dense union representation is within a workplace, the more likely it is that you are to win your campaign, whatever it may be. But the 4-day week can actually be a really good way to bring new people in, because it is quite an attractive thing to campaign on. And as we said before, it's a campaign that is a win-win for workers and employers too. So it's quite an attractive one in terms of its success rate. So that's where I would start. So I'll start with your colleagues. Sorry, yeah.
Before you carry on to that, just to add in there, this is what we would say for any workplace change or campaign that you're doing, be it something around family-friendly policies or a health and safety issue or the 4-day week or pay. You always start by talking to your members. So we've got information available via TUC Education on the different tools you can use. Phil mentioned some of them there as well. But whatever you normally use to communicate with members, be it email newsletters or WhatsApp or surveys or face-to-face meetings, you can still use them for this. Back to you, Phil.
Absolutely, yeah, it covers the whole gamut of improvements to working conditions. So another way, and this is a crucial way as far as I'm concerned, of building a 4-day week campaign in your workplace, is to get in touch with us at the 4-day week campaign. A lot of the work that I do is working with workplace union groups to build their campaign from the ground up. So that could be coming in to run training about building a campaign. It can be sort of regular meetings to see how a campaign is going and talk about ways to escalate such a campaign. And there is I believe, a survey that's going to be put in the chat as well. If you are listening to this and you're interested in starting a workplace 4-day week campaign, you can fill out that survey. I'll see it and I'll be able to get in touch with you to have a further conversation about that. And then more practical advice is that, so it's an interesting one. Campaigning for a 4-day week, it can include a sort of organising in reverse. So traditional organising, you might go into a workplace and you're trying to find what is the key issue that is coming up again and again and again. And that's the one that we're going to build a campaign around. What we would argue is that the 4-day week is the solution to a lot of workplace issues. And some you might not even think about, as we said before, if low pay is a key issue in your workplace. Now, the 4-day week can help with that because it's going to reduce your commuting costs. It's going to reduce your childcare costs. It's going to reduce your treat costs. I mean, when we're all exhausted at the end of a week, that's when we reach for the takeaway menu and start a bit of, online shopping to make ourselves feel better for how exhausted we are. A 4-day week could be a solution to that. So it's about going out and finding out what the issues are in your workplace and really putting your thinking hat on and thinking, right, how does a 4-day week respond to those issues? And sort of in that way, you kind of can collectivize around a number of issues under the umbrella of a 4-day week, and therefore you're likely to bring in more of your colleagues and more of your union members.
There's some great tips there. Thank you for that. Really great to get going with. I want to turn to some of the questions that we've had posted from the audience, and I think they'll cover quite a few more issues as well about this. So quite an interesting one we've had is what are your thoughts on a 9-day fortnight? Could this be used as a transition to a 4-day week, or are there any other ways that you might move towards a 4-day week?
I think that's bang on to say a transition to a 4-day week. Absolutely. What we see the 4-day week as the end goal. It may take your organization some time to get there. We would seek, or if we were a union group, we might seek to get an agreement to work towards a 4-day week and have several stepping stones on the way there. So I think it's just come up today, actually. Some organizations or some companies are looking into soft Fridays. This idea that on a Friday, maybe everyone works from home, maybe everyone has a lighter schedule, maybe there are no meetings. That could be a way to sort of, sell the 4-day week or an early step towards the 4-day week to your boss as early doors. But yes, the 9-day fortnight, any kind of meaningful reduction to your work hours is fantastic. And obviously, we just would say, don't stop there. Go for the 9-day fortnight and then push a little bit further and see if you can get to the full 4-day week.
Yeah, all often good maybe to do stepping stones towards the big goal, introducing it incrementally. Okay, we've had a question about part-time workers. What are the things we need to think about when we've got some colleagues who are part-time rather than full-time? And have you got any examples of where you've got part-time workers already in a workplace that's 4-day week? What happens then?
Yeah, so and it's a great question again, because this is a real consideration if you are going to build a workplace campaign for a 4-day week, because you're going to have colleagues who are working part-time, so you'll need to be able to respond to this issue. And essentially, it will be up to the organisation themselves how they deal with it. What you can see is that you have sort of a pro rata reduction in the working week. So, for instance, if you work 5 days and you reduce to 4 days, that's 20% of your working hours that have been reduced. So you could see an equal reduction in the working hours for part-time workers. In other situations, what we've seen is that part-time workers are offered the ability to stay on the same hours that they have, but they're just slightly better remunerated, so that there's an increase to their pay. And then there's other things that can be offered as well, in terms of extra holiday days and things like this. That there are other ways that you can kind of make sure that the move to a 4-day week is equitable for everyone in an organisation. And again, I will just stress that is key, and that is why we need to speak to our colleagues when we're building 4-day week campaigns, because again, our colleagues are going to be part-time workers, and they're going to have different ideas about what they would like to see from the transition. And you need to make sure that your campaign keeps that equality front and centre as it grows.
That's excellent advice there, Phil. Thank you. A couple of people in the chat have said they would like to work with you or your organisation in their particular workplace or their union branch. So, yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure that we'll post a link to the 4-day week campaign website where you can get in touch with Phil via that, and we'll make sure that goes out in the email as well. So, what I wanted to ask you next is. Sorry, just one second. The questions kind of keep reshuffling themselves. Okay, we've had quite a lot of questions about the education sector. So I assume this, anything that is with children, nursery schools or universities. And I know obviously we're dealing with different age groups there, but how would it work in education, teachers, support staff, nurseries, etc., etc.?
So this is actually a cause that is near and dear to my heart, because I am an NEU member. So yeah, a 4-day week in education is definitely something that I would like to see. I mean, I'll say this here and now, it is going to be potentially a slightly longer road than it is elsewhere. But that's not a reason to get dispirited. In fact, there is, and it's worth looking this up, there's Dixon's Academy chain. That's a multi-academy trust. They are working towards a 9-day fortnight at the moment, and they're doing that by moving certain things around, and sort of making sure that there are provisions on that extra day for the students when there are fewer adults in the building. But but there's a lot of different ways it can work. It's interesting actually at the moment. The 4-day week in education settings is actually really taking off in America. There's hundreds and hundreds of school districts right across America that are switching over to a 4-day week. And again, it's the recruitment and retention angle that is a big play there. I don't need to tell the education workers listening to this that there is a massive retention issue with teachers in this country at the moment. It's really hard to hold on to teachers because the workload in education is so high. At the moment, the stress level is so high, and there's no time to recuperate. This nonsense about they get plenty of holidays where they're half terms and whatnot. We know it's not true. Teachers are very stressed and working very, very hard. So it could be in this country a solution to our massive retention issues. It's definitely something to look at. Again, like I said, there are different ways of doing it. What we see is that some schools run sort of a provision on a Friday. With younger ages, that provision is more sort of a childcare possible provision. And then sort of older age groups, you might see that a Friday is more of a sort of a larger sort of physical activity day, where maybe you don't need as many staff on the ground to deliver that. But what is quite exciting is that it's kind of all to play for at the moment. It's up to us as education union members to really think, what would we like to see about a 4-day week? What would we like to campaign for, to make sure that the 4-day week is just for us as workers, but also that it's giving the students that we work with the best education possible. Because look, they're no different to us. They get to a Friday and they're exhausted, just like we are. There's every reason that reducing their working week slightly is going to give them a bit more staying power, a bit more stamina throughout the week, so they're not falling asleep in double maths on a Friday afternoon.
If we can get to not falling asleep in double maths, I think that would be a result, certainly in my case. Okay, so Phil, could you tell us a bit more about some of the employers that are already trying it? You mentioned, was it South Cambridgeshire Council and a school chain, but what are maybe some of the other employers that are, if you're able to, tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, absolutely. What I might do is just sort of pick some of the examples that from industries where you might not expect, because for office-based and desk-based workers, it's really quite feasible. We have a number of, for instance, charities where a 4-day week is very successful. But actually, it can work perfectly well in other industries as well. Part of the 4-day week trials we ran in 2022 included a fish and chip shop called Platton's. We also had, there's a brewery as well, Pressure Drop Brewery. They run a 4-day week. In fact, there are a number of 4-day week breweries now up and running, which is great to see. We also worked with a company called Ormiston Wire, which is a manufacturing company. A lot of people believe that, if you can't do a 4-day week in manufacturing because people have to be there to make sure things are done. But that almost ignores the fact that we've had massive leaps forward in terms of robotics and in terms of like technology in general that have meant that manufacturing can be far more productive than it ever was. And it's about making sure that that extra productivity, those extra profits are being justly shared out with workers as well, in terms of them reducing their working week. Literally just last week, we saw a restaurant in Plymouth, I believe. I think it's called Fraser's, but they just switched over their entire staff to a 4-day week. Now, again, hospitality. People think, how can it ever work in hospitality? Because you have to be there to do the job. But actually, the owner of this restaurant in Plymouth, basically, he said, look, in hospitality at the moment, we're struggling to hold on to good staff because we work a long, hard week, and people are leaving to do other things. I switched to a 4-day week. he switched to a 4-day week because he wants his great staff to stick around. And in fact, he said, choosing to work as a chef doesn't mean that you should be penalized forever by having to work massively long hours. You should have as much access to a work-life balance as anyone else, which I think is a fantastic reason to switch to a 4-day week.
It absolutely is. We've had a bunch of questions about the kind of practicalities of implementing this. So a viewer has asked if it's generally advised that all staff have the same day off. For example, what are they doing in South Cambridgeshire? Does everyone have the Monday or the Friday, or do you split it, or how does it work?
Yeah, another great question. I think some people have a concern that if we as a country switched over to a 4-day week, everyone would be working Monday to Thursday, and nothing would be open on a Friday. For example, you couldn't get a GP appointment, or you couldn't go to the pub, and that's obviously not the case. There are so many different ways to work a 4-day week, and it actually largely depends on the needs of your organization. So we've worked with companies that do a Monday to Thursday, but also others that do a Tuesday to Friday. Some places will, within their office, have sort of an A team and a B team. So one works the front half of the week and one works the back half of the week. That way there's always someone in the office. Some organizations run so that they split it up by hours. So they're just making sure that they do their 32 hours of the 4-day week. Others still do it roughly based on employee desire. They ask their employees, right, which day would you like off? Give us a rank of which days you would like off, and then they try and work it out so everyone gets one of their preferred day off, but also that there's someone in the office or someone in the workplace at all times. So it massively depends. And again, when you make the case to your employer for a 4-day week, it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of different options to suit the needs of the workplace. What we would suggest to organizations and to those campaigning for a 4-day week is that they push for a trial, potentially, if the workplace isn't sure about how the 4-day week should work for them, because that gives you a nice amount of time to adjust, to sort of tweak how the 4-day week works. Monday to Thursday might work for you, but if it isn't working for you, that doesn't mean that the 4-day week isn't working. It just means that you need to think a bit harder about how it can work where you work.
Thanks, Phil. Another practical question. What would a 4-day week mean for annual leave entitlement? Would there be an impact on that?
Yeah, and this, again, it depends on the organization, and it depends on the discussions that you have with your employer. And this is kind of why a 4-day week should be a union issue, because what you want to avoid possibly is a 4-day week imposed upon you by your employer that maybe doesn't include the benefits around annual leave, for instance, that you would expect to see. So some organizations will see a reduction in annual leave roughly of equivalent, but others maintain the exact same amount of annual leave that they've always had. Again, if you have a strong workplace union group, you're able to advocate for the best possible offer that you can get. So yeah, again, it really does depend. But again, if your colleagues are happy, if your colleagues really want this 4-day week in terms of ongoing, we want to maintain our stamina during our working lives, we'd like to have a 4-day week, we don't mind losing a few holiday days, then absolutely, if that's something you agree upon, then that's something that you can go forward with. So definitely, you need to have these discussions as colleagues and think, what would you like to see from your transition to a 4-day week?
Some great advice there. Thank you. Okay, you mentioned South Cambridgeshire as a case study, but we've also heard that the current government, have threatened to reduce funding for councils who are using the 4-day week. What do you think might change post-election on this? Can we look forward to a more positive approach?
I mean, we certainly hope so. An evidence-based approach would be the least we would expect from a reasonable government. It's actually quite interesting around South Cambridgeshire. So yes, they have been threatened with financial penalties for their 4-day week. Actually, at the moment, South Cambridgeshire District Council were looking to end their trial of a 4-day week and sort of make a final decision about what they do next. But they're not currently able to end their trial because they can't properly assess the financial impact of their 4-day week, because the government refuses to put a number on these financial penalties. They're sort of just meant to be there, I think, as a vague threat. So actually, that's why South Cambridgeshire District Council is in a sort of permanent trial at the moment. Again, what we would expect and what we're pushing for at the moment is for the next incoming government, whoever they may be evidence-led on this. And actually, I've not shared the link with you, so we won't be able to put it in the chat. But at the moment, we are kind of having an election campaign of our own going on to get people to write to their prospective parliamentary candidates to get them to pledge to support a 4-day week. So, I mean, we're posting about that on social media at the moment. So if people are able to follow us, they'll see that come up, and they can definitely find information about that on our website. So yes, we're trying to make sure that, in, is it 4.5 weeks, 5 weeks time, that things are looking a little bit more positive, a little bit more rational in terms of the government's position on a 4-day week.
I think it's 4 weeks tomorrow, right? Today's the 5th, so I think it's 4 weeks tomorrow. Okay, but let's see. Okay, we've had a bunch of questions about compressed hours. Does the 4-day week mean you are working compressed hours? Would it have an effect on people who might already be doing so? But I think that people would appreciate some clarity on this area, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a number of things there. So compressed hours, which is where you're taking the full-time hours that you have already and just squeezing those into fewer days. I mean, as a flexible working option, not against it, but what we would say is that you are losing out on the actual benefits of a 4-day week, both as an individual and also as an organization. You're not seeing those benefits that you would get from rest and recuperation. You're not seeing those benefits that you would get. I mean, if we look at how tired you might be at the end of an 8-hour work day, it's hard to believe that adding an extra 2 hours on top of that at the end, that you're going to be the most productive that you can be. We would say as an organization, you'd be far better off reducing the working hours and making sure that you're focused on quality over quantity. You're making sure that you are reducing and actually making sure that the people working for you are happy, healthy, and well rested, which compressed hours don't quite give. And as I said, I can see why people would choose them, and why, if you're given flexible working as an option, you might seek to compress your hours just to hold on to that extra day. I mean, we haven't really talked about the fact that having 50% more weekend, completely changes your life in terms of being able to, go to the dentist, go to the doctors, get all your life admin done, see your family, see your children, do your hobbies, volunteer. So I can see why people would go for compressed hours, but we would argue that it's actually a meaningful reduction in hours that you want, because you're going to see the proper benefits from that. And one real key thing here is that, from the UK trials, we saw the reduction in sickness absences. People are healthier, maintain their health better when they work less. I mean, it sounds obvious when you say it, but it's borne out in the statistics that actually, people aren't falling apart when they're working less than they used to. So that's why we would say compressed hours, fine, but a true 4-day week of reduced hours, much, much better.
I think sometimes we need to say the obvious parts out loud, don't we? They get hidden otherwise, and it is obvious. Working an extra 2 hours on an 8-hour day, not necessarily the best. Okay, we've had 2 or 3 people ask about when you're in the area of convincing an employer, what are the arguments that take them from being skeptical to being positive? What are the key things that take them over that line?
Such a good question because it tells me that people are really thinking about how am I possibly going to go and raise this with my employer. So that's great. And I would say it comes down to who your employer is. We would say that in order to persuade your employer to entertain the idea of a 4-day week, first you need to find out what motivates them. Are they motivated by efficiency? Are they motivated purely by the bottom line? And that will tell you what kind of arguments you need to develop for the 4-day week. Um, there is evidence out there that can cover a whole different range of management needs and management questions. So, for instance, if it is the bottom line, you would be pointing at the UK trials and saying, well, actually, these 61 companies, saw an average profit increase of 1.4% on their 4-day week, whilst also recruiting and retaining better, whilst also making sure that their staff were not as absent as they had been. So if that's what drives your employer, brilliant. Talk about the bottom line. If your employer is keen on the environment, you might be saying, well, if we switch to a 4-day week, that's a day less that people are commuting. That's a day less that we've got all the lights on in the building. So we're sort of having a positive impact on the environment there. So again, it really does depend on who the decision makers are within your organization. And this is good advice for really any sort of campaign that you might be building. You really need to work out. You might need to do a little power map and just work out who's the most powerful in your organization. Where do they sit on a 4-day week, and then what motivates them? What could get them to change their minds or to become more supportive of a 4-day week?
Thank you, Phil. And that, I think, leads into the next question, which is about resistance from colleagues, not the employer. Is this something that you've encountered in some of the examples you previously mentioned? And you've already talked about how important it is to bring people with you and to have your members or your colleagues on side. But is internal resistance something that you've found before?
Unfortunately, yes, it does happen, and it's to be expected. Any workplace improvement, you'll often find that there is at least one or two people who are going to be skeptical. How could we possibly do this? And if they're not, aware of what the 4-day week is, you can understand it. We're reducing the amount we're working, but we're going to do just as much work. How's that going to happen? It can take some explaining. And what we would say is, and this is, with the training that we run, we do an activity based on this, where we try to get people to put themselves in the shoes of a skeptical colleague, and put forward the potential counter arguments that they might raise, and then try and think of, arguments that would counteract the counter argument. So because there's plenty out there, like I say, a colleague that says, how are we going to get, the same amount of work done if we're working less? Well, you'd say to them, well, because we're better rested, we're more productive per hour. And that's borne out in this trial, that organization. We've seen the evidence here, there, and everywhere. So you're able to counteract that. It's important to, if you can, inoculate. So as I just said then, to try and think of the counter arguments that might come up, or the worries or fears or obstacles that the colleagues might perceive. And when you're talking to your colleagues about 4-day week, try and meet those head on and say, look, we understand if you're not sure about how we're going to do as much work as we do now in less time, but here's all the reasons why it's totally possible. Here's the organization in the same industry as us that has a fully successful 4-day week already up and running. So yeah, that's how I would say to deal with a colleague who's not too sure about the 4-day week just yet.
Yeah, and that's the key point. Just yet, we can work towards bringing them along with us. Okay, so one viewer has thought of, I think, a real issue that might be presented by employers. If there is a sector where services must be provided 24/7, perhaps healthcare, or even in some aspects of security or hospitality, an employer might argue that we have to take on more employees to cover this. How would you justify that to them? Because they're going to be thinking, this is going to cost me more.
Absolutely. Sometimes the way I like to talk about this or think about it is maybe flipping things over and arguing. Imagine that we already work a 4-day week and you're arguing for the case for a 5-day week. Knowing what we don't know now, which is that the working a 5-day week leads to, as we've talked about before, burnout, stress, ill health, high staff turnover, all of these things that cost an organization money and will affect your bottom line. By working a 5-day week, you're kind of putting the extra pressure, extra weight onto your organization, be it hospitality, be it a 24/7 workplace. So actually, it's about looking more deeply about the costs that an organization incurs, and actually thinking, well, actually, if we reduced our working week, but we weren't having to, for instance, spend a lot of money on agency stuff. That's something we did talk about earlier with South Cambridgeshire District Council. Councils across the country have a huge agency spend. I think it was something like £2 billion either last year or the year before. And that's because they're struggling to fill roles long term. So they're getting in people in short term who maybe only do the role for a week or two, don't have the full knowledge of an area, but that cost far, far more because the agency itself takes a huge cut of the wage bill that comes through. So by reducing the working week, you're actually saving an awful lot of money there. So that's some of the arguments that we might use. But yes, an organization might need to hire some more staff. But there's cost savings elsewhere to help to balance that out.
Thanks, Phil. We've had another bunch of kind of practicalities of it. A few people have asked whether this would affect pension entitlements. If you've got a defined contribution or indeed any other type of pension, does the reduction in working days and hours have an effect on that?
So I would go back to the 100-80-100 model that we talked about right at the very beginning, and the idea that you are doing 100% of your work in 80% of the time, roughly. That's what we're aiming for. If you're doing 100% of your work, then you should be entitled to 100% of your pay and your benefits and the pension that you would accrue. So again, I mean, look, it's a conversation that you will have to have with your employer as they'll be working out. But again, if the organization is able to maintain the same level of profit and productivity, there is absolutely no reason that it should impact your pension whatsoever.
Thank you. And just want to add the equalities angle here, especially for employees or workers who might have a disability, where they might have already been forced to reduce their hours and take a reduced pay because of adjustment, because of the need for adjustments or something else related to that. What's your thoughts there, please, and your advice on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we don't often talk about enough, is that the 4-day week is an equalities issue. Not only for people who might have a disability, but also for those with caring responsibilities, either for children or for family members, elderly family members, or just family members in general. The 4-day week offers a path towards full-time employment just over a shorter amount of time. Because as you were saying, there are many workers out there who've been forced into taking on part-time work or reducing their work week, maybe from 5 days to 4 days. And actually, what a lot of people find is that they end up doing roughly the same amount of work they were doing over 5 days, but just being paid less, which we feel is monstrously unfair and definitely not something that should be happening, especially as we're campaigning for a nationwide 4-day week. So yes, I think the 4-day week can really be an equalities issue. Particularly, I mean, we might even look at the gender pay gap. A lot of the gender pay gap comes about because it tends to be when people have children. Essentially, that's where a lot of the pay gap can come in, because women tend to have, or are more often having a break in their career, taking on those childcare responsibilities, and then when they come back to their career, maybe they're not quite where they would be if they weren't taking on those childcare responsibilities. And that's not fair at the moment, that there is that gender pay gap. What we're saying is that a move to a 4-day week can make that ease back into full-time working, or that way of maintaining full-time working a lot more approachable. And it's interesting because it's not an obvious way in which you close the pay gap, the gender pay gap. But I believe it is the Women's Budget Group who we've done some work with. They've done some serious analysis of this, particularly when they were looking around the era around COVID, in which they saw that childcare responsibilities were being shared a lot more evenly during that era of furlough and whatnot. And they extrapolate from that if we move to a 4-day week, childcare responsibilities, look, they're not. We need to say this, that they're not fairly distributed at all. But it would give us an opportunity to bring some more balance into that and close that gender pay gap.
Thanks, Phil. We've very nearly time to close. I think we've got through a lot of the questions there, so I'm not going to take any more for now. But what I did promise is that in the last couple of minutes is we would reveal the results of the poll. So we've had the poll running throughout this webinar, and we've asked you if you believe the UK could have a nationwide 4-day week by 2030. Now, I can see the results, and I know that you in the audience can't. So I'm about to reveal, and you can see, people are still voting. I might just give it a second to let a few more people cast their votes, which is interesting. And we asked you, yes or no, quite straightforward. So I'm just going to reveal them now. People should now be able to see the results of that poll, where we've got 88% of people saying that yes, they will believe we will have a 4-day week by 2030, and 13% saying no. So I think that's pretty good going. Phil, you've done a great job of making the argument to our audience today. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you all for joining us, and thank you for bearing with us during the technical blip that threw me off earlier on. And I know there were a couple of audio issues at the beginning, but thank you for bearing with us. We will take all this feedback in and make sure it doesn't happen again. So thank you, Phil, for joining me. We will send out all the details of your organisation to the audience. And all that remains is for me to say goodbye and have a good rest of the day.